Unknown planets, legendary battles, and incredible stories await you here. But don't forget to be a part of this universe. Subscribe, like, comment, be a part of this great adventure. The grand chamber of Vasara Prime stood silent beneath its vaulted dome, the cold blue glow of suspended constellations flickering like distant memories. Delegates from 100 worlds sat motionless, their forms an array of crystalline, reptilian, vaporous, and mechanical entities, each bearing the weight of countless generations. The air hummed with quiet apprehension, the vast hall, once a sanctuary of order, now a tomb of unspoken fears. At the center of it all, beneath the looming crest of the Galactic Council, Chancellor Vartinus remained still. His deep violet eyes scanned the chamber, searching for resolve amid the faces of a once unshakable order. He had witnessed wars turn into alliances, civilizations rise and fall under the careful guidance of this council. He had seen entire species eradicated, not through conquest, but through the slow, quiet erosion of diplomacy. Yet in all his centuries of service, never had he stood before an enemy so relentless. Never had the very existence of the council hung by such a fragile thread. The holo display flickered, casting an eerie glow across the chamber. A three-dimensional image of Earth materialized above the table, a planet of blue and green, its swirling clouds almost deceptively innocent. But encircling it was a lattice of red, expanding outward like a spreading disease. 27 fallen systems. 16 planets reduced to smoldering ruin. The grim tally of human expansion. And still they did not stop. The chamber stirred, the weight of that realization pressing down upon them all. Then, a voice, hoarse and weary. "Another fleet lost," rasped Elder Torvan, his bronze-scaled hands tightening against the table's edge. His species, the Terran, had once been the Council's sword arm, the unbreakable force that upheld peace. Now, they were spent, their fleets shattered, their worlds burning. "The Eltari defense line has collapsed. We have no reinforcements left." A murmur swept through the room, a sound more akin to desperation than strategy. "They refuse every diplomatic channel," said the crystalline emissary of the Lutheri Dominion, her prismatic form dimming with unease. "Every envoy we send is destroyed before transmissions can be made. We offer ceasefires. They respond with annihilation. We extend our hands, and they burn them." From across the chamber, another voice, soft, yet carrying the weight of countless generations. The Arkan Collective's representative, a being of shifting mist, spoke. "We don't understand them. That is the problem. We have given them peace. We have offered them alliances. We have given them a seat at our table. And still they war. What do they want?" Silence followed. Chancellor Vartinus exhaled slowly, the sound deliberate, measured, final. "They want certainty." His voice cut through the room, cold as the void beyond their walls. "They seek dominion, not coexistence. Their history is carved from conquest, their nature honed by struggle. Their civilizations were never given peace. They took it. And they view compromise as weakness, negotiation as a stalling tactic. We have spent decades attempting to reason with them." His gaze swept across the gathered leaders. "And we have failed." The chamber doors trembled. A hollow boom rumbled through the walls. At first, it seemed a minor disturbance, a fluctuation in the artificial gravity, perhaps a mere tremor in the power grid. But then, the alarm screamed to life. The holo display flickered once more. Earth's image vanished, replaced by a live feed of the upper atmosphere. And there they were. The humans had arrived. The defenses of Vasara Prime had been built to withstand cosmic catastrophes. A planetary shield, forged over millennia, encased the surface in an impenetrable barrier. Interceptor fleets hovered in low orbit, their weapons primed. Ground-based ion cannons lined the surface like sentinels, ready to strike. And yet, as the Council gazed at the feed, the truth became undeniable. None of it would be enough. Through the thick, turbulent clouds, they descended. Their ships did not gleam like the elegant vessels of the Lutheri. They did not pulse with the ethereal energy of the Arkan. They did not whisper through the stars like the silent hunters of the Terran. No, these were behemoths of steel and fire, blunt instruments of destruction. Each hull bore the scars of 1,000 battles, each movement a testament to brutal efficiency. The lead ship emerged, an obsidian monolith against the pale glow of Visara's twin suns. Titan's hand. Its engines roared as it moved into position, a leviathan swallowing the horizon. Chancellor Vartinus straightened. The chamber's murmurs ceased. Even the council's most steadfast members seemed frozen, caught between defiance and the slow, creeping weight of inevitability. Vartinus did not hesitate. His hands moved across the control panel, inputting a sequence locked away for centuries. A code never spoken, an order never given. Until now. Across the chamber, panic stirred. "Are you certain?" Elder Torvin's voice, once unwavering, now carried the ghost of doubt. Vartinus did not answer. A deep hum resonated through the chamber. The walls sealed. The great transmission beacon, dormant for an age, flared to life, its signal pulsing outward. One final command, sent across every fleet, every outpost, every last bastion of the Galactic Council. Not one of surrender. Not one of peace. A simple declaration. All forces. Engage. Above them, the first blasts of planetary bombardment began. The sky above Visara Prime burned. Blinding arcs of energy carved through the atmosphere, slamming into the planet's surface with devastating precision. The planetary shields held, for now, but the strain was evident in the flickering glow of the defense grid. The humans had arrived with force, their fleet blotting out the stars like a storm of iron and fire. Chancellor Vartinus stood at the command platform, watching the destruction unfold on the massive display before him. He had known war before, but this was different. This was not a battle for territory, nor a clash of ideals. It was extermination. The chamber was silent, save for the quiet hum of the tactical systems. The Council had given its final order. Across the stars, every remaining fleet, every last outpost, every hidden warship of the once mighty Alliance had received the same command. All forces. Engage. The weight of it pressed down on him. He had spoken those words with conviction, yet now they tasted like ashes. A new alert pulsed through the chamber. One of the human ships had broken formation, descending rapidly toward the surface. It was an impossible maneuver for a vessel of that size. Any conventional fleet would have been torn apart by the gravity well. But human ships were built differently. Their hulls bore the scars of countless battles, their systems designed not for elegance but for resilience. They did not evade destruction. They absorbed it. Incoming landing craft, an aide reported, his scaled fingers flying across the interface. It's heading straight for the core spire. The core spire, nerve center of the Council. The humans were not interested in drawn-out sieges. They were coming for the heart. Vartinus straightened. Evacuate the lower levels. Activate internal defenses. If they want to take the Council, they will have to burn their way through it. The aides hesitated. He understood why. For centuries, the Council had operated under the belief that diplomacy would always prevail, that civilization had outgrown the need for bloodshed. But those ideals had crumbled in the face of cold reality. The humans did not negotiate. They conquered. A deep tremor shook the chamber as the human craft breached the shield, cutting through the sky like a meteor. Anti-air batteries fired in desperate succession, but the ship did not fall. It pushed through, engines roaring like some ancient beast of war, and crashed into the lower levels of the spire. The impact sent a shudder through the structure. Emergency lights flickered. Dust rained from the high-vaulted ceiling. Then, silence. Until the doors blasted inward. Smoke and flame curled through the entrance as figures stepped through the breach, their weapons gleaming in the dim glow. The first was clad in dark armor, its surface scorched from re-entry. A soldier. But not like the warriors of the Council's fleets, those who fought in measured, calculated skirmishes. This one moved with purpose, with a predator's certainty. Behind him more emerged. A dozen. Then 2 dozen. Vartinus met the soldier's gaze. Even through the visor, he could feel the weight of it. A voice, distorted through the helmet's translator, crackled through the chamber. Surrender the Council. The war ends here. Vartinus did not move. Around him, the last of his guards raised their weapons, uncertain but resolved. You speak of an ending, the Chancellor said, voice steady. Yet all I see is the beginning of something worse. The soldier tilted his head slightly. You misunderstand. This war was never about you. The council is irrelevant. He gestured toward the burning sky. Humanity does not conquer for the sake of power. We conquer to survive. The words were not spoken with arrogance. There was no threat in them. Only certainty. For the first time, something cut through Vartinus' resolve. A crack in his understanding of the war he had spent his life trying to prevent. Then tell me, he said, stepping forward, what is it you are truly fighting against? The soldier hesitated. A distant explosion rumbled through the chamber. The battle outside raged on. But in that moment, in the burning ruins of the council's greatest hall, something shifted. A question had been asked. And for the first time, a human seemed uncertain how to answer. Smoke curled through the fractured remains of the grand chamber, its tendrils weaving through the air like restless ghosts. The once majestic hall, a symbol of order and diplomacy, lay in ruin. Cracks splintered its crystalline walls, banners of ancient alliances lay shredded on the scorched floor, and the flickering constellations that once adorned the vaulted ceiling trembled as the spire's power grid struggled to hold. Chancellor Vartinus stood amidst the wreckage, his violet eyes locked onto the human before him. Commander Elias Wren, helmet in hand, scars lining his face, did not move. Behind him, his soldiers remained disciplined, silent shadows in the smoldering light. Around them, the last of the council's guards kept their weapons raised, uncertain but resolute. The chamber had become a pressure seal about to rupture. Outside, the war raged. The planetary shields flickered, battered by relentless human bombardment. The air vibrated with distant explosions, the dull hum of energy discharges, the dying cries of fleets that had once protected the oldest order in the galaxy. But here, in this ruined chamber, something far more precarious than war was unfolding. Vartinus's voice cut through the tension, steady but sharp. You claim this war was never meant to happen, that you fight to prevent extinction, and yet your ships lay waste to entire systems. Your kind marches through our worlds as if they were yours to take. Elias met his gaze without hesitation. Because if we didn't, we wouldn't exist. The Chancellor studied him, the weight of 1,000 years of diplomacy pressing down upon him. He had sat at tables with warlords, negotiated with tyrants, tamed civilizations on the brink of self-destruction. But never had he encountered a species that refused to be categorized, that shattered every rule of order the Council had spent eons constructing. You believe the Council plotted against you, Vartinus said, that we intended to erase you. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate. You think us executioners, yet you do not ask why. Tell me, Commander, why do you think we feared you? Elias's jaw tensed. He had prepared for defiance, resistance, even surrender. But not this. You saw what we were capable of, Elias said, voice edged with old wounds. You saw us endure, adapt, rise from destruction time and time again. And it terrified you. Vartinus regarded him with measured silence. And you never wondered why? Elias exhaled, his fingers tightening around his helmet. I know why. Because we weren't supposed to be here. A deep stillness settled between them, as heavy as the ruins around them. Elias continued, his voice quieter now. We weren't meant to survive our world. Earth was a grave long before we reached the stars. We poisoned our skies, turned our oceans to acid, burned through our resources until nothing was left. We should have perished in our own foolishness. Every logical model, every statistical projection, said we wouldn't make it. His lips pressed into a grim line. And yet we did. He took a step closer, ignoring the weapons still pointed at him. And that's what frightened you. Not our weapons. Not our technology. Not even our wars. It was the simple fact that we refused to die. Vartinus's silence was unreadable. Elias's voice was quieter now, the confession raw. You thought you could slow us down, contain us, guide us. You gave us a seat at your table, but only as long as we remained small enough to fit in the chair you built for us. His eyes darkened. You weren't waiting for us to evolve. You were waiting for us to disappear. Vartinus felt the weight of centuries pressing down upon him. The Council had never seen itself as an oppressor. It had endured for millennia, preserving order, preventing chaos. But standing before him now was the living consequence of those decisions, a species that had defied extinction, not through superiority, but through sheer defiance. He clasped his hands behind his back. "You misunderstand, Commander. We did not fear your survival. We feared what would follow." Elias frowned. Vartinus continued. "Do you know how many species we have guided into the stars?" His gaze swept the ruined chamber. Hundreds. Worlds that once burned in their own wars. Species that destroyed themselves before they even left their atmospheres. We tempered them, taught them restraint, ensured they did not bring their old conflicts into the void. His voice grew quieter. "But you, your kind, arrived different. You were not guided. You did not wait for permission. You took to the stars on broken ships, engines fueled by desperation rather than ambition. And the moment we saw that, we knew." "Knew what?" Elias demanded. Vartinus's expression was unreadable. "That you would never stop." A tremor passed through the chamber as another blast rocked the spire. The shields would not hold much longer. The Chancellor turned toward the display flickering above them, the war unfolding across the planet. "We have seen species like yours before. Civilizations born in fire, driven by necessity rather than curiosity. And we have seen how they end." His gaze returned to Elias. "You are not the first." Elias's breath stilled. Vartinus held his stare. "You are simply the first to make it this far." The weight of the words settled between them. The commander's fingers flexed against his helmet. "Then tell me," he said, quiet but unwavering, "what happened to the others?" Vartinus did not look away. "They consumed themselves." Silence. Elias exhaled. Slow, controlled. "And you thought if you contained us, you could prevent the same fate." "We tried," Vartinus admitted. "But humanity is resistant." He studied the commander carefully. "You claim you fight for survival. But tell me, Commander, what happens when you win? When there are no more wars to fight, no more enemies left to defy?" Elias's jaw tightened. "We build." Vartinus inclined his head slightly. "Then why have you not done so already?" The words struck deeper than any weapon. For the first time, Elias had no immediate answer. The war outside was proof of it. Humanity had won battle after battle, seized world after world. Yet here they stood, still fighting, still burning. The question clawed at something deep within him. Before he could respond, an urgent voice crackled over his earpiece. "Commander, the fleet is moving into final position. We need your orders." Elias exhaled, long and slow. He looked at Vartinus. The Chancellor, once an adversary, now stood before him not as an enemy, but as a mirror reflecting the truth humanity had refused to face. They had spent so long fighting to survive that they had never considered what came after. Elias raised his communicator, but his fingers hesitated over the command. For the first time in this war, he didn't know what order to give. Vartinus watched him carefully, and in that moment, saw something unexpected. Oh, perhaps, after all, humanity was not as unstoppable as they feared. Perhaps, they were still searching for the same thing the Council had tried to preserve. A future. The sky over Visara Prime cracked with fire. The planetary shield, once a flawless sphere of energy, flickered and faltered under the relentless human bombardment. Shards of burning debris rained from the heavens, trailing smoke as they struck the surface. The planet, for centuries the seat of power in the galaxy, was becoming a graveyard. Inside the ruined Grand Chamber, Chancellor Vartinus watched the slow collapse of everything he had sworn to protect. The command displays flickered, struggling against failing power. The tactical grid, once a brilliant web of coordinated defenses, was a fractured mess of red markers, each signifying another lost fleet, another broken stronghold. The war was no longer a question of strategy. It was a countdown. Behind him, the human commander, Elias Wren, remained motionless, his face unreadable. He had not spoken since the last transmission from his fleet. Yet Vartinus saw it, the hesitation in his posture, the slight tension in his hands. The war had brought him here, but now, in the quiet devastation of the Council's heart, something was unraveling. Vartinus turned to face him. "You have won." The words tasted bitter, but they were undeniable. "What happens now?" Elias's jaw tightened. He lifted his communicator, his thumb hovering over the transmission key. "That depends on you." The Chancellor gave a hollow smile. You hold my world in your grasp, Commander. This is no longer a negotiation. Elias met his gaze. Then why am I still standing here? A tremor passed through the chamber as another impact rocked the spire. The shields wouldn't last much longer. They both knew it. Vartinus studied the man before him, the soldier who had come to destroy his people and instead found himself questioning his own war. The humans had fought with unrelenting fury, carving their way through the stars, yet here stood one of their finest, hesitating at the edge of absolute victory. The Chancellor exhaled. You say you fight to survive, he said. But survival at what cost? You claim the Council tried to erase you, that we feared your strength. But tell me, Commander, what has your strength gained you? Elias did not answer. Vartinus pressed forward. You have taken worlds. You have shattered fleets. And yet you are still fighting. Always fighting. His voice lowered. Will it ever be enough? Elias exhaled sharply, as if the words had struck something he had tried to bury. His grip on the communicator tightened. It has to be. Why? Vartinus demanded. What drives you forward, even when there is nothing left to win? Elias's voice was quieter now, but edged with something raw. Because if we stop, we become weak. And if we are weak, we die. Vartinus tilted his head slightly. And who told you that? Elias's mouth pressed into a hard line. The past. The Chancellor's gaze sharpened. Or your leaders? Silence. Outside, the human fleet adjusted formation. The final wave of bombardment was preparing to strike. If the humans gave the order, the shields would collapse, and Visara Prime would fall. Elias knew this. And yet, he had not given the order. Bartena stepped closer. You said this war was never meant to happen. That humanity did what it must to survive. His voice lowered, cutting through the hum of distant destruction. But is survival worth becoming the very thing you feared? Elias's fingers flexed around the communicator. Vartinus saw the moment of doubt, the hesitation, and seized it. Call them back, the Chancellor said. Elias did not move. Call them back, Vartinus repeated. End this. The commander's breath came slow and measured. The weight of 1,000 battles, 1,000 choices, bore down upon him. He had been trained to win, to survive at all costs. But now, with everything in his grasp, a question loomed before him. What came after? His thumb hovered over the transmitter. A single command would finish this. But another would change everything. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. Stand down. The transmission pulsed through the fleet. For the first time since the war began, the sky over Visara Prime fell silent. The silence stretched over Visara Prime like a fragile thread, ready to snap. The battle had ceased, but war was never so easily undone. Above the ruined capital, the sky still bore the scars of conflict. The once impenetrable planetary shield flickered weakly, its integrity shattered by relentless bombardment. The vast fleets of humanity, an armada of steel and fire, hung motionless in orbit. Their engines hummed, their weapons powered but stilled. Silent sentinels awaiting the command that would decide the fate of an entire civilization. And within the grand chamber, amidst shattered stone and the acrid scent of scorched metal, Chancellor Vartinus stood across from the man who had waged war upon his people. Commander Elias Wren had given the order to halt the attack. But the war was not over. Not yet. Vartinus studied the human, watching the way his fingers curled around his communicator, how his shoulders held a tension that did not ease. A soldier's stance, one who had spent too many years bracing for the next shot, the next blow. Even in this moment of quiet, Elias remained a man still standing on a battlefield. You've ordered your forces to stand down, Vartinus said, his voice measured. Will they obey? Elias exhaled slowly, gaze flickering toward the open sky. They'll hesitate. And if they refuse? The commander's grip tightened. Then I make them listen. A simple statement, but it carried weight. Authority, defiance, something deeper. Something that even Elias himself had not fully reckoned with. Vartinus nodded slightly, considering. Your war machine does not halt easily. No, Elias turned back to him. It doesn't. A tremor passed through the chamber as another distant explosion echoed through the ruined city. Not an attack, but the slow, inevitable collapse of a world left to burn in the wake of battle. Across the planet, fires still smoldered, casting long shadows over streets littered with the debris of a fallen empire. The dead did not rise when the guns fell silent, and the scars of war did not fade with a single command. Vartinus gestured toward the open display screen, where the human fleet still hovered above the planet. They wait for your next order. Elias knew that. He also knew not all of them would agree with what he had done. The war had been fought for too long, its cost too high. The soldiers who had bled for every world taken, who had watched their comrades die in pursuit of victory, would they see this ceasefire as betrayal? Would they see him as a traitor? His second-in-command, Captain Lorne, had already questioned his restraint once. Others would too. Elias straightened. The fleet stands down. No more attacks. His voice carried through the ruined chamber, steady, unshaken. That order stands. Vartinus regarded him with something unreadable in his violet eyes. And if your people demand otherwise? Elias met his gaze. Then I tell them the truth. A humorless smile ghosted across the Chancellor's face. And do you believe they will want to hear it? Elias let the silence settle between them. Would humanity listen? Could they? The war had not just been fought with weapons, but with ideology, built on the belief that survival meant conquest, that strength alone could ensure their future. He had lived by that truth, had fought for it. But standing here, in the ruins of his enemy's seat of power, he felt the weight of a realization pressing down on him. War had been easy. It had given them purpose, an enemy, a reason to keep fighting. But what was left when there was nothing to destroy? Vartinus watched him carefully. You stopped the killing, Commander. That is not the same as winning peace. Elias inhaled sharply through his nose, exhaling with slow control. No, it's not. Outside, his fleet stirred. Their weapons remained offline, but their formation had not broken. The weight of thousands of lives hung in the space between orders and action, waiting for a confirmation, for a reason, for something to replace the fire that had driven them forward for so long. A transmission request flickered on his communicator. Lorne. No doubt seeking an explanation. Elias ignored it. For now. Vartinus studied him. I will have to answer to my people as well. The Chancellor's own world had been reduced to ruin, their fleets decimated, their cities shattered. What remained of the Galactic Council would demand retribution, would see surrender in Elias's restraint. And yet here they stood. Two men who had commanded war, now standing in its aftermath, uncertain of what came next. Elias exhaled, his voice quiet but firm. So what do we do now? Vartinus turned to the ruined city, where the fires still smoldered and the scars of war would remain long after they were gone. We begin again, he said. It was not a promise. Not yet. But it was something. And for the first time in years, Elias Wren wasn't sure if he was supposed to be a soldier anymore. The ruins of Visara Prime still smoldered, the air thick with the scent of charred stone and metal. Smoke curled through the shattered spires of the capital, where once the Galactic Council had ruled unchallenged. Now, its seat of power lay broken, its great banners torn and forgotten, its halls filled with ghosts of what had been. Above the planet, humanity's fleet remained in formation, silent, still, waiting. Their engines burned softly, but their weapons, for the first time in years, remained cold. The war had ended not with a triumphant conquest or a desperate last stand, but with a single order: stand down. But peace was never so simple. Chancellor Vartinus stood at the edge of the crumbling Grand Chamber, watching the sun rise over the wounded city. The once glowing skyline had been reduced to jagged silhouettes, but the light touched the broken towers with something almost like reverence. Even ruin could not stop the dawn. Behind him, Elias Wren approached, his boots crunching against the debris-strewn floor. He moved differently now. No longer the soldier who had stormed this world as an invader, but something else. Something unfinished. They accepted your orders? Vartinus asked without turning. Elias stopped beside him, gaze fixed on the horizon. Mostly. Vartinus arched an eyebrow. Elias exhaled. Some are questioning it. Others think I've lost my nerve. His voice was calm, but the tension beneath it was unmistakable. They didn't fight this war just to be told to walk away. And yet they have. For now, Vartinus considered that the humans had been an unstoppable force, a war machine built out of necessity and desperation. Even their own leaders had feared what would happen if they ever slowed down. What happens to an army with no war left to fight? The Chancellor studied Elias carefully. You don't know what comes next, do you? Elias didn't answer at first. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. I don't think anyone does. Vartinus nodded slowly. Good. Elias gave him a sidelong glance. Good. You're uncertain. That means you're thinking. The Chancellor turned to face him fully. We've spent years watching your kind, trying to predict what you would become. We were afraid you would never stop, that even if you won this war, you would simply find another. But now I see something else. Elias frowned. And what's that? Vartinus studied him for a long moment, then said simply, choice. The word settled between them, weightier than it should have been. For so long, humanity's path had been defined by survival. The war had not been waged for conquest or power, but because there had never been another option. But now, with the enemy subdued, with victory within their grasp, they had a choice. And choices were dangerous things. A transmission request flickered on Elias's communicator. He didn't need to check it to know who it was. Captain Lorne. Again. His second-in-command had been patient, but patience had limits. Elias sighed and accepted the call. Lorne's face appeared, sharp and expectant. Sir. Elias had fought beside this man for years, had trusted him in the darkest hours of the war. But he could already see the question forming behind his eyes. Tell me this wasn't a mistake, Lorne said. Elias didn't answer immediately. He could feel Vartinus watching him, waiting. The weight of his decision pressed against him like gravity. Finally he said, It's not a mistake. Lorne's jaw tightened. Then what is it? Elias looked back at the ruined city, at the faint golden light cutting through the rising smoke. A beginning. Lorne's expression was unreadable. We didn't fight this war just to let them rebuild. No, Elias agreed. We fought so we wouldn't have to fight again. A silence stretched between them. Finally, Lorne exhaled sharply. Understood, sir. The transmission cut out. Elias lowered the communicator, his grip firm. He turned back to Vartinus. That's one conversation handled. There will be more. There always are. The Chancellor's gaze drifted back to the ruined city. Rebuilding will take time. Elias nodded. Then we should start now. Vartinus studied him once more and, for the first time since this war had begun, saw something he had never expected to see in a human. Hope. The sun continued to rise.